Hello everyone, I'm going to do one more video today about the lovely city of Paris, the city of lights, which just experienced a number of blackouts. Actually, it's quite an amazing picture. You know, the whole of Paris was dark and there was only the Sacred Heart Basilica, which was illumined. No, I'm not suggesting it's a miracle. They probably have their own independent energy source and so on. But it's actually quite a beautiful picture. I stayed there, about 25 years ago. They have, it's not only the church and the basilica, but they actually have accommodation for people who are traveling, temporary accommodation. And I think it's run by nuns, if I remember correctly, and they don't charge you. That was 25 years ago. You didn't have the plague of, drug addiction and so on. So you could actually stay there for nothing, for 2 or 3 days. The only thing was, at the time, that because they have the exposition of the Eucharist 24 hours a day, they would ask you, first of all, are you Catholic? And I said yes. And he said, would you mind very much if I ask you a favor? And I said, no, of course no. Because I was with my 2 little girls at the time. And she said, well, you see, we have a 24-hour exposition in the Church of the Sacrament of the Eucharist, and we don't want for the church to be completely empty, especially during the wee hours of the day, the night. We always want someone to be there, but of course we never know how many people are going to be there or not, and we try to get a sort of a person who says, yes, I shall be there. I guarantee that there will be someone there. Would you be willing to do that? I said, yes, of course. And I did. I think I went from 2 to 3 in the morning, or 3 to 4, or something like that. And it was actually quite a good experience. It always is. Anyway, so what I'm going to talk about is about these Olympic things, but I'm not going to dwell so much on the actual show, but I'm going to share with you or talk about it at 3 different levels. Okay, the organizational level, the sports, being a sports event, that level, and then the show and the carnival and so on. All right, so the opening ceremony. So there we saw, these characters doing what they usually do. This almost this psychopathic need to exhibit yourself, exposing themselves in front of children, exposing their private parts and all the rest of it, dancing next to children in that manner. So we, I didn't see the whole thing, I saw the videos, so we had to witness. The whole world was exposed to this spectacle, typical of a moral swamp, of filth, of excrement, of sewage, that is anything concerning or has something to do with the EU nowadays. In truth, the entire Western world, but European civilization is not that. European civilization is something else. So where did all this refuse and excreta come from? Because our civilization has nothing to do with this. This was a swamp of filth and of garbage. In a city where, besides these outbreaks of there is an outbreak of bugs and rats going on, a plague almost, all at the same time. Okay, so symbolism, sometimes symbols speak louder than words. And whoever knows, if you know how to read the symbols, you will understand much better the deep nature, the meaning of what is taking place. So yes, first of all, the open ceremony, okay, most possibly the most shabby, murky, depressing, sad, pathetic and disgusting spectacle we are going to see this year. But let's talk about it in different levels. First, the organizational level. Just in terms of organization. A total disaster. That's what it was. These Olympics will go out as perhaps the worst ever. Let me point out some details. First, a series of sabotages sabotages. That is what they are called. So that left passengers in France unable to use the trains, the railways. Many people were going to Paris just for that initial opening ceremony, the opening of the Olympics. They couldn't. They also had to evacuate an airport for the same reason. Sabotage. There are many luxury hotels in Paris with workers on strike. Why? Because it's not because they want to raise in salary, but because they have not been paid, because their employers have not paid them. The luxury hotels owing money to their workers, to their employees. Then there were sexual assaults. There were thefts and people being robbed. For example, you might have seen in one of the videos the Australian cycling team. They were robbed of their van where they're carrying all their equipment. There were breaks into athletes' locker rooms. For example, the Argentinian football team, they were robbed of watches, jewelry, and a number of things, calculated about 50,000 euros. The Coca-Cola Europe president, staying in a hotel, was robbed of his computer, telephone, watch, a Rolex from his hotel room. The cafeteria of the Olympian Village had to reduce the food because of lack of supplies. Athletes complaining that there wasn't enough food. The beds practically made of carton The athletes had to use public transport for about 40 minutes, which wasn't working very well without any air conditioning. This is in the Olympic Village. Can you call this a well-organized event? They had originally planned to sell about 600,000 tickets. That were 600,000 attendees to the opening ceremony. At the end, they were hoping for hopefully 300,000. But of those 300,000, 200,000 tickets had been given, not sold, to members as invitations to members of groups, clubs, association, organizations. That is to say, economically, just in terms of finance, a disaster. And of the remaining, of those 200,000, obviously it was not the general public. It was just their own cronies. The provision of seats for the general public for the opening ceremony was so bad that people were leaving because they could hardly see anything. You could only see what right ahead of you, a little part of something, but not the whole picture. People left. This is all according to the French press that I'm quoting from it. And then it also occurred to the organizers in this sick emphasis on technology, on social control. It occurred to them that in order to access the central area where the open ceremony was taking place, all around the center of Paris, you could only get through with a QR scanning thing. You know, one of those square things. If you lived near it, for some reason, you couldn't get home. Why not? Well, first of all, to depend on technology, solely on technology, without a B plan for manual, for something to work manually. Well, if it was me in the middle of it, an oldie as I am, I don't know that I would be able to use that QR thing. I always evade it. But anyway, that's not important because I'm sure I would have found someone willing to help me. But the thing is that what happened if you were very comfortable with it, using that scanner thing, but you didn't have your phone, or you forgot it at home, or you lost it, or someone stole it from you. In the situation where you don't have a phone, you couldn't get home. But not only that, then the whole system broke down. So even if you had the phone and the scanner and all that, you couldn't get home. Because you couldn't go through. You had to go through the scanning thing, and it wasn't working. There was no other way that you could get through. Some people perhaps were able to stay with relatives, if you had relatives in that area, or family or friends perhaps, but how many people were not in that situation? How many tourists, for example, they couldn't get to their hotel. The QR scanning thing did not work, wasn't working. More than 3,000 university students were asked to leave their dorms in order to make room for police and security and firefighters. Fine, okay. But asked to leave is not the appropriate term here. They didn't practically give them any notice. They were practically kicked out. Almost from one day to the next. Now, you see, a student, surely they knew, okay, so could have they give the students, some time to organize themselves, because, 6 months, 3 months, 1 month, 3 weeks. Because if you are a French student, okay, a native of the country, you could perhaps, purchase a rail ticket and go home to the provinces where your parents are, if the trains worked, which they weren't. But what if you are, say, a foreign student? You don't have family in France. Where do you go? Because, you cannot just expect that practically from one day to the next that you can get a hotel in the center of France with the price hikes and everything. You might not be able to afford it. Perhaps you can afford a day or two, but 3 weeks? A hotel? So they didn't even give them time to organize themselves. It is impossible to rent anything in Paris too at the moment, so that was out. The hotels with the price hikes and the ones on strike, where do you go? Okay, something else. The hospitality venues, the restaurants, all the coffee shops, all the hotels. Those areas around the center of town, I'm saying the center of town, it's the center of Paris. They were restricted areas. So these restaurants and coffee shops and all this, they have estimated that they lost between 30 and 70% of the turnover that they were expecting, they had planned to get, because of the changes at the last minute. Some of these establishments also complained that it's not only that they didn't gain more people, more customers, it's that they lost apparently about 90% of their customers. Now, that can't be a great success. And that is something that you don't really see talked about very much in the TV screens. The taxi drivers and the tour guides too, unable to work because of restricted areas all over town. You cannot work, you do not have access to the area. That's in the center of Paris, cut off. The International Olympic Committee officially welcomed a Dutch volleyball player who had raped a 12-year-old girl, sent to jail for just 1 year. Fine. But they decided to give him, of all people, this special formal welcome. Oh. There was an investigative commission before all this, investigating the corruption of monies and contracts and conflict of interests and embezzlement of public funds, etc., etc., before the whole thing started. So when the games started, they hadn't completed their investigation, so they closed it down, suspended. Who knows whether they'll take up their investigation again, or if they do, how long it will last. This is the logical thing for the swamp to do. So we saw lots of technology and drones and computers and artificial intelligence, but not enough food for the athletes in their cafeterias, and an outbreak of rats. However you look at it, it was not well organized. Let's look at the sports. It is a sporting event. Okay, so as expected, the athletes from Russia and Belarus were not allowed to compete because of their government military operation. Something that grates the Brussels gang quite. This is not the first time, but these decisions really go against the entire Olympic spirit, against the Olympics charter. This veto against those athletes from these countries is a policy of double standards that actually ends up violating the basic principles that go against international human rights and of the UN Charter. The International Olympics Committee is an organization that goes against human rights. I repeat, the International Olympics Committee is an organization that's working against human rights. It is a mafia network against human rights. It is led by a character, infamous, disgraceful person called Thomas Bach, who proposed a total veto on the athletes from these countries, complete ban on athletes that their sport is team sports. Team sports, no, banned those athletes. In the case of athletes in individual sports, like for example, tennis, okay? They had to show, oh my goodness, in order to merit entrance and acceptance to participate. Well, obviously the usual ones, dopage and also, but nevertheless, also, they were subject to a really intrusive personal investigation. Their emails, their messages, in order to satisfy themselves, this character Bach, unworthy of the surname, of being neutral, and that was to let them compete. But compete without the flag or their national anthem, obviously. So they were subject to, in quotes, special investigations. It is ignominious, shameful, despicable, and reprehensible that one person on this planet continues to watch these Olympics. and what is taking place. These candidates had to meet their eligibility criteria. So if you belong to a team sports, you couldn't, but individual, as I said, yes, you could, but as I said, they looked into their messages, their statements, gestures of support. All of these had to be scrutinized, and just to see if you have some, if you approve, or if you have some sort of empathy with what your government is doing. And you couldn't, and you can't, these athletes cannot belong to clubs or associations linked to anything official, for example, the armed forces or the state security. Sometimes we see, for example, in horse riding, a general or something, okay, no, they couldn't be in any way associated with anything official. They were investigated as to, spied on, really, as to whether they had ever posted a meme or anything like that in the social networks. This goes against fundamental human rights, the UN Charter of Fundamental Rights, the citizens' rights, anyway. But to top of this infamy, this abomination and this disgrace and this contempt for Olympic values, they actually made sure that, as they said that they got with the help of a third party. They were using third parties. Now, who were these third parties? Oh, perhaps they meant, professional private investigators or professional this or, companies. No. You know who they got to spy on them? The Ukrainian intelligence service. So they keep an eye on them. The Ukrainian intelligence service, I'm sure they will say, oh, they're fine, excellent people. There are not very many of these athletes. I think there are about 12. They were not allowed to participate in the opening ceremony. If they win a medal, it will not be announced and it will not be registered in the official registers. This is really a cold-blooded political execution of the Olympic spirit. Now, the director of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, this Thomas Bach, this piece of German crap, announced that once in Paris, they would continue continue to be observed. We have asked the Ukrainian intelligence service, we asked them to facilitate to us information about said athletes. Okay. So they're supposed to inform them as to how the athletes are behaving. Okay. What kind of a joke is this? What kind of mockery is this? The International Olympic Committee is an organization that is acting against human rights. This is an organization that right now should be under instruction before the International Court of Justice, with that Thomas Bach, unworthy of that surname, at the head. My friend, sorry, I had to cough there. This is the end of the Olympic spirit. It's incompatible with the Olympic spirit. In the 1966 Charter of the right to freedom of expression, the right not to be discriminated against, are being denied openly in these Olympics. But, as just one example, Israel, which was prosecuted, there was a verdict against it. With Israel, they have no problem whatsoever. They have actually been excellently received by Macron and the rest of the gang. Is this normal? Is this just? Like in everything else, it means that they have stopped pretending, yes. They're just there giving us all the middle finger. If you're watching the games, try to switch it off, the television set, as much as you can, so that you don't become an accomplice by, if not by commission, by omission, by silence, by not saying anything about it or doing anything about it. Because this is infamy. This is an embarrassment. This is an insult to human conscience. Try to watch it as little as possible. It is not only Israel, you know. In previous times, in 2004, the games coincided with the invasion of Iraq. Those who illegally invaded Iraq, nothing against them in the Olympic Games. 2012, those who illegally invaded Afghanistan. 2012 in London, nothing. So what we are seeing is that politics is now above sport in the Olympics. It has been contaminated by this virus, just like so many. The Eurovision Song Contest, the Nobel Prize for Peace and others. This is the swamp's rules-based order, the order based on our rules. The International Olympic Committee has to die off. It's just a political, ideological means of propaganda for the same ones. And this opening ceremony, this filthy thing with minors, as if it an apology of attraction to children. Oh, it's not only that. You see, there was part of it was also 2 or 3 children, I believe, on a boat with adults and going towards the dark into a tunnel. And then what happened to the children? Oh, when they came out of the tunnel, they had disappeared. is a problem with children being kidnapped and all that kind of thing. So was this another example of symbolism of that? We have to see how it all has degenerated. Do you notice that it is the people, normal people, who have been excluded from it? Do you remember before a host country, they would, host the thing, and you would see the culture of that country, the dancing and singing, whatever it was about the country and the people, and you could see people with their national costume and all that sort of thing. All that is gone. The people have been excluded. The folklore, the culture, gone. That connection with the people of the country itself. So remember that this is because it is important to destroy all forms of human cohesion, connection, the collective of the people, the family, the religion, the country, the culture. It's part of that breaking it all up, destroying all forms of humanity coming together, of belonging, and leaving the individual just by itself there by his little self, like an item, like an atom, completely individualized. They can control you better. You're just by yourself, more vulnerable. Isolation of the individual. But it was also about what has disappeared also is the solemnity of the occasion. The solemnity of these celebrations gone. Oh yes, to top it all off, the Olympic flag was raised upside down. Or was this another subliminal message? And amidst all these phantasmagoria, a parade, a mixture of a gay pride parade and a Brazilian carnival and I don't know what else, loads of absolute rubbish. Oh, Marie Antoinette's head in someone's hand. Sort of a mixture of the satanic and the vulgar, seedy, cheesy, dirty, soiled. What was that? An expression of the dominant ideology and world view that they are imposing on us. The director of the whole spectacle, a young man, looks wealthy, homosexual, Jewish. Oh, perhaps being Jewish, he didn't know the meaning of the Last Supper. Perhaps he didn't know that it was the Passover of those at the table. Perhaps he didn't know that, or perhaps he did, who knows. And the woman there in the middle is famous. She's famous in France for being, she's always talking, she's lesbian, she's always talking about it. She's Jewish too, okay. Don't know whether they... But there she was, like a roll of fat lard. But the people were not there. All that contaminating virus. Where was the sport? As I said, like everything else, the Eurovision has gone that way. All competitions, really. If there is a competition about art, you will see that, you will not see art. If there is a competition about women's beauty, well, what you will see is the winner, a man with a beard, wearing a dress. The continuous humiliation and eradication of women and womanhood. And if it is a competition about singing, you could be dumb. I mean, it doesn't matter. Because it's not about what you sing, all the music is about that filth. So what are they transmitting, really, with this grotesque, ridiculous, extravagant exhibition? And what can we do? We see the tools that they use. I have spoken quite a few times about the most important thing for us is to lose the fear, to actually turn the tables on them, make them afraid. This is not, I'm going to try to say a few more words on that, but just to remind you that this is not about right or left in politics. This is about those at the bottom against those at the top. Which side are you on? It is about the dominated against the dominators. So, what are we to do? Well, it's in all wars you have to use the arms and the weapons equivalent to those of your adversary. If they use cannons, you cannot fight them with bows and arrows. And if they use shields to protect themselves, you cannot just be there, with a silk dress or something. And if they use cavalry, you cannot just go there to fight them, just strolling about. We have to use the means, perhaps alternative media is the only thing we have left, really, to fight these propaganda machines, these channels. Of course, theirs are more potent, for sure, but we can begin to scratch a little. We know we are already scratching a little bit because the repression and the censure and the surveillance and all those things, when they increase, that is when we are hurting them a little bit. Not much, just a little. But they can scare easily. And this swamp is increasingly more filthy, and the crap is beginning to get to their necks already. And that is when they act. So if we want our country back and our culture and our civilization, we need to fight back, and in order to fight back, we need a roadmap. Because we are not ready to engage them in battle yet. They're very powerful. They're too powerful. But we can begin at the beginning and resist. Not accept, not assume that anything you're told is true. What we saw, we cannot allow that to be normalized. We cannot allow that to be our culture. That is not our culture. If we allow it to continue, we are done. It's pure degeneracy. It was like a cheap nightclub. It looked like a roadside brothel. That vulgar. That is what we saw. So we have to have a strategy of resistance first to empower ourselves a little bit. And here I am going to use I follow, I have quoted from him before. He is a geopolitical analyst with the Geopolitical Institute in Spain, and his name is Juan Antonio Aguilar. And I owe much of what I say. He's a little bit of a guide for me. And he came up with the 5 Ds of resistance. But this is just to guide us a little bit, to remind us a little bit. The 5 Ds: distrust, dissidence, disaffection, disconnection, disobedience. Distrust. You have to begin to not accept everything that you're being told. I know that if you're watching this channel, you probably don't, but remember that it's not only what they say, it's what they do not say, and it is what they say in an ambiguous way, which is always the best way. A bit of truth, a little bit of lie. Okay, so start distrusting. And if you are advanced in this art, you will end up trusting nothing, nada, nothing. Now, the second is this. So that's distrust. Dissidence. Learn and train yourself to say no. You can think of examples in which you could have said no. And you can think of examples when to say, no, I am not going to tolerate that. Disaffection. Okay. Detachment. Try to detach yourself, not to be so dependent. They will try to persuade us by, they sell us things. This is, to do with progress and all this sort of thing. Whatever it is that they sell you, try to make sure that it affects you as little as possible. Detach yourself. What they put on the shows and the tellies and whatever you read, this and that, all these stupidities. Disconnection. Try to be not dependent on the system. The first thing is the cards, the cash, the debts, and so on. That's obviously each individual has to lead his or her life. But the point is, try to break the chains as much as you can. The less chains you have, the better for you. Do not forget that this is about control. Do not or try to collaborate with them as little as possible. Disobedience. Do not accept, do not respect them. Lose that fear. That is all I'm going to say today. Thank you and goodbye.